So we're back, and we are now going to be talking about critical appraisal of the evidence, which is the next step in the EBP process. So we have moved from clinical inquiry, which is our wonderful question that we're worrying or wondering about, and we created a fabulous PICO question, and then we used that PICO question to search the literature. And now we have our keeper articles, the ones that we found in our search that really are answering our question. And now we're at the point where we actually have to read the articles and decide a couple of different things. Are they well done? Do they answer our question? Are they feasible with our population, and a couple other things? So that's where we're at. So we are now into our blue bar of this process. We're in rapid critical appraisal, evaluation and synthesis of the evidence, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So here we are with our steps. So we're moving along nicely. We are into step 3, which is, at least halfway through. So that's great. And here's our objectives for what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be really spending a little bit of time on the difference between critical appraisal and critique, because they're very different things. We're going to look at the key questions involved in critical appraisal of research studies, be they qualitative or quantitative. And we are also going to talk about, once we're done reading the articles and critically appraising them, how we're going to move from having a pile of articles to organizing them and then synthesizing them in a way that helps us move to decision making. And that's exactly what we want to do, is get to a decision. And so that's what this is all about. So a little bit of history related to why critical appraisal is so important. Back in the day, we mostly based our practice on tradition and experience alone. And then, as research literature began to be available to us through, the early days of the databases and much more dissemination, we moved into a phase that's kind of called research utilization, which meant we would find a research study, a single study, and use that to inform our practice and make changes based on a single study. And so that was sort of the age of research utilization. And now we've moved to the place that's an evidence-based practice approach, which is the application or the utilization of a body of evidence to inform practice. So we have, we've slowly over time come to a place where we're really looking at the body of evidence. What is the combination of the literature that's out there tell us related to, what we're currently doing, what's the best practice, and how do we know what we need to do to move towards best practice. So that's the difference between research utilization and EBP. A lot of people think they're the same thing, but they're different. And EBP is based on utilization of the body of evidence that speaks to our questions. And so all the things that we used to do prior to, knowing how to look at the body of evidence and have an evidence-based approach to practice, those things are outdated, and they provide an inferior level of information to make decisions based on information-based decisions. And so we can't just rely on experience and practice anymore and anecdotal information. We can't just rely on one source of information. Now that we have access to the body of evidence and we know how to get there, that's the standard that we need to stick to. So that's why we have to learn this. So practice that's based on flawed evidence can't be considered evidence-based practice. So how do we know how good the evidence is that we're looking at? And that is why we're at this step. So in the critical appraisal process, we're trying to decide whether the evidence we've now found through our search is what level it is, but what's the quality of it? How well is it done? Is it flawed? Is it well done? So in order to do that, we need to be able to discern the following things. What was the methodology? And was the methodology executed well or not so well? Was there any bias in the study we're reading and looking at? We've got to be able to discern that. Is it reliable or unreliable? What did they find? What was is it clinically meaningful? What were the outcomes of the study? What were the findings? Did it matter? And finally, is it applicable to your patients? What you're reading can, be wonderful, but maybe it doesn't fit for the patient population you're wondering about. Maybe it's unrealistic in terms of cost related to the resources that you have available or the setting that you're in. So these are the kind of things that our critical appraisal is all about. How do we get to know the answers to these questions? And so there's lots of tools out in the that you may have access to that are critique tools or critical appraisal tools. We have developed a set of these here at our center, but they are extremely helpful tools. So whether you want to use our tools or some other tools that are out there, tools that help you work through a critical appraisal of each kind of article, whether it's an RCT or a cohort study or whatever it is, tools that help you do this process are extremely helpful, and they'll make it go much quicker for you. So what is appraisal? What is appraisal? And how is it different than critique? So what are the kind of things that you get appraised? Forget, related to research or science or anything else. What does the word appraisal bring to your mind? So when I think of the word appraisal, I think of getting my jewelry appraised or my house appraised or appraising a college for one of my kids to go to. And when I'm appraising college for one of my kids to go to, I have very different kids. Some are like me, some are like my husband. So they're very different. And so what I'm looking for in a college for my older son would be very different than what I'm appraising a college for my younger son, because one's sort of a science guy and one's an artistic guy. So what you're looking for in an appraisal or in a high value, high stakes decision, that's the whole point in appraising the literature. What are you looking for? What's the thing you're trying to learn more about? And so that's why this appraisal approach is much more appropriate than a critique approach, and that's the difference here. So usually appraisal is related to a high-stakes decision. And appraisal is about what is the value of this thing I'm looking at? What is it worth? And that's the mindset that I want you to be in relative to appraising the literature. What is it that I'm looking at? What is the value it brings to what? Answering my question, helping me find the solution, helping me understand what best practice is. What's the value of this article to answering my question? It's the mindset you need to be in. But you know how to appraise things, right? You've done it before. So don't think of this as a new skill. Think of this as a skill that you already know how to do, but you have to transfer that skill over to appraising the literature. So it's not as overwhelming that way, okay? So we have tools that can help with that. I've already explained that to you. So critical appraisal is the process of examining something to determine the worth or value of it. And in this case, it's the worth or value of the research evidence in the literature. And you're evaluating its validity, how well did they do the type of study that they said they were going to do, the results of what they found, and the relevance of those findings to your clinical decision making. So validity, reliability, i.e. results, and the relevance to your question and the decision you're trying to make. So it's not the same as critique. Critique is a process we teach you how to go through in order to look at an article and kind of pull it apart and see what they did or didn't do. So this is a more of a positive sort of value look that we're doing with the literature, but we do it with a critical eye because we want to make sure we're being very careful in what we're looking for. So we have critical appraisal and critique, and they're different things. Common beliefs and barriers relative to critical appraisal. So why do people think this is so hard? People think critically appraising the literature is really hard because, one, it takes too much time. Well, it does take time when you're first learning how to do it, and or if you try to do it without any tools to help you. The other reason is people say, it's just too hard, I don't know how to do it. Well, it's too hard if you don't practice it, and if you don't understand the reasoning behind it and why you're doing it, and identify some tools, and work with colleagues and get good at it. It takes a researcher or an expert in EBP to do it well. That's not true. It takes somebody who understands research methodology and understands EBP, and it takes a certain skill set that you can learn. And the other barrier is that you have to be a whiz at statistics to be able to critically appraise. And that also is not true. You do have to understand the concepts behind statistics, p-values, and validity and reliability, and confidence intervals and standard deviations. You do have to understand what they mean, but you don't have to understand, you know, the ultimate deep dive level of every bit of research methodology and statistics. You need to understand, what do the statistics mean? I mean, that's the reality of it. When it comes to critical appraisal, you have to do some work. You have to read the articles, and you have to do something with them. And this is the place where it gets tricky for people, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I have to actually read the articles? Yes, you do. You have to read the articles and then some. So when we talk about critical appraisal of each of our keeper studies, we want to be looking at the key things of one, determining the level of evidence. So that was our hierarchy. Remember, level 1, level 2, level 3. So once you know what kind of a study it is, you can determine the level. And then the second step is appraising the quality. And that's what this step is all about. So we have 2 steps, and when you put those 2 steps together, you are able to determine the quality of the study. Okay? So remember our hierarchy. So that's how we determine the level. And to determine the quality, we do critical appraisal. And this is an example of one of our tools. Like I said, there's others out there. But what you'll notice, particularly in this case, in our tools, is it's a rapid critical appraisal of a randomized controlled trial, or a controlled trial without randomization. Then we have another tool that looks just like this, but the title's different. It would say rapid critical appraisal of a descriptive study. And then another tool, rapid critical appraisal of a cohort study. Because the questions on the tool are going to be specifically related to the kind of article, kind of study you're appraising. So the questions that you want to ask about the quality of an RCT are different than the questions you would ask about the quality of a qualitative or a descriptive study. So that's why these toolkits are really, really important. Okay, so here's our 3 main questions in critical appraisal that you'll find on every tool that hopefully you'll use out there, but certainly on ours. Are the study findings valid? And when we say valid in this case, we mean as close to the truth as possible. And these questions are all about the methodology of the study. So what was the rigor of the design and the methods? If you're looking at randomized controlled trial, the questions in this section will be about all the things they should have done in a randomized controlled trial. And you'll go through these questions and say, did they do that? Yes or no? Did they do this other thing? Yes or no? You know, was it was it random assignment? Did they do random sampling? Did they, was it blinded to the subjects? Was it blinded to the researcher? What did they do to control the fidelity of the intervention? All of those questions will be listed on the tool, and you'll answer them as you're looking at your article. If the answer is yes to every question, looks like they did a pretty darn good job. If they missed a lot of things, then you're starting to worry a little bit about all the things they missed or didn't tell you about. And that's how you begin to get a sense of this study that I'm reading about, did they do a good job on the validity, which is about the methodology. The next set of questions on the tool is about reliability, which is the importance. In other words, what were the results? What were the findings? Were they important? Did they achieve statistical significance? And if not, were they clinically significant? What was the effect size? What was the confidence interval? Like, did what they find make a difference in their study? And might it make a difference in my population? So, what was the methodology? Did they do a good job? And what was the importance of their findings? That's the second set of questions. And always in critical appraisal, the third set of questions are the findings applicable to my patients? Can I do the same thing at my place with my patients? So, validity, reliability, and applicability. Those are the questions that critical appraisal in EBP are all about. Okay? So, that's for quantitative. Now, when we get into the qualitative literature, some of the language changes a little bit in qualitative work because they can't use the same terminology for qualitative work because it's a different kind of research methodology. So I just wanted to put these in here so you'll know that instead of validity and reliability in qualitative studies, you're going to see words like trustworthiness, and the questions are going to be about, was this study done in a credible way with dependable findings? are the findings confirmable, and instead of generalizable, transferable. So there's a lot more to understand in all of this, but just know that you're not going to see the same language in quantitative findings that you're going to find in qualitative. So just know that. In all critical appraisal, though, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, you always want to be looking at the study for this reason. Are the study results believable? Was the study rigorous enough? And can it apply to my population? Can I use these findings in my practice? The whole point of evidence-based practice is to determine whether the research literature that's out there, that these wonderful scientific folks have done, can be translated into real practice settings and applied to patients. That's the whole point of evidence-based practice, is that we take the knowledge that's out there and apply it in the real world. And so this is the step that helps you get there. Okay? Ultimately, always, will this keeper study that I decided to critically appraise, will it help me to take best care of my patients? Okay? So we've critically appraised our first awesome article. And then you move on to the next article. Remember we had 14 articles we kept 12 of them? You have to critically appraise all 12. That's the body of evidence, and each one of them needs to be read and critically appraised. And now you've critically appraised the body of evidence, okay? The thing about critical appraisal of the evidence is it's oftentimes the place where people hit the wall on this process because it takes time. And these are the requirements of it. Yes, you do actually have to read the article. Yes, you do have to reorient yourself to research methodologies so that you can do critical appraisal. Yes, you do have to practice this skill. And yes, it takes time. So this is why we have the camel with the hump here in this slide, because sometimes this is hump day. And people, people really have not so much trouble with this step, but this step takes a little bit of energy and rigor and persistence. And so we like to make sure that people understand that critical appraisal is the sit down and, really get into the actual literature at this point. And it does take time. So you have to plan for that. But it's the only way that you can know what the literature says, is to read it and identify whether or not it's answering your question. So now we're going to take a break, and we're going to switch gears and go through an example of critical appraisal of an intervention study, a randomized controlled trial. Dr. Melnick is going to be walking us through an example of how do you actually do a critical appraisal and what you should be looking for. Some of the things I've talked to you about, she's going to show you in a walk-through example. And so take a break, take a deep breath, take a stretch, and then come back and spend a little time with Dr. Melnick, showing you exactly how to do what I just described to you.